Good evening, everybody,
Hi,
and welcome
everybody.
to the show.
How you doing?
I'm Alasdair, and about 4 inches to my right, in a shocking twist, is the amazing Marguerite, who is
Hello.
not in a tiny box this week.
I am not in a tiny box in the corner tonight. That is correct.
This is kind of the other version of the show we do. Under normal circumstances, we do a piece of opening fan art, which this week is by the amazing Axolotl sketches. And for the record, Peter could have taken Elias if it had been any other kind of car park.
Of course.
And then we do.
It's the car park.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And then we go on to do an opening monologue, and then we do a reading, and then we do some shenanigans, and then we do a sleep. This week, however, is the exciting mode 2 of the show, which is when we have an amazing guest on to talk about the amazing books that they've written. And you don't get very much more amazing than Jen Williams. Jen is the author of 2 remarkable fantasy trilogies. I say remarkable because I don't like fantasy especially, or read fantasy especially, he says, having just finished A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking and 9 Goblins. But let's move on.
He's very particular about his fantasy, let us say.
And Jen's books are a big part of the type of fantasy I respond to. Her work is fiercely intelligent, inventive, ambitious, very funny, and fundamentally compassionate. She has a wicked ear for dialogue. Jen is directly responsible for what I would argue is the single greatest line in fantasy, recent fantasy literature, which is get on your giant bat and fuck off.
Content warning. There will be swearing tonight, yes. And in fact, we should probably do just a quick content warning in general, because Jen has made the transition to writing for crime. And tonight we'll be talking about her crime debut, Dog Rose Dirt, or as it's known in the US, A Dark and Secret Place. I hope I got that right, because I'm holding the UK version. And there will be some content warnings. We are not going to spoil this book, because we know that crime books rely a lot on the experience of reading them. But it is about a serial killer, so there may be discussions of death and dying and violence and all those good sorts of things. And we will all be swearing all night long.
It is a bit murdery.
Yeah, it is a bit murdery. So, with that fantastic introduction, are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. We will bring on Jen. Oh gosh, there we go. Hey Jen, how you doing?
Hiya. Hello.
Everybody in the chat, are you hearing Jen okay? I'm seeing that her audio is coming through fine, but just let me know if I need to turn anything up on my side. And look,
there is some test dialogue, just in case you need to hear me. Testing.
Sing a song. Jen, why is Garrus the best companion in Mass Effect?
Yes, there you go.
Oh, no, I mean, there's too much to say about Garrus.
Show us Garrus.
Oh, yes.
I love that he is guarding your British Fantasy Awards.
The
Garrus
best,
Victorian, Jazz Smooth.
The bestest space boyfriend ever.
Oh, the big space bird boy. That's what we call him. Yeah, and he does look after my awards because, he's got loads of guns. And he's very tough.
Keep them away from
I have rarely related more viscerally to a tweet than last night when you hit the top of Mass Effect 3 and in quick succession you tweeted something about, oh god, I forgot how quickly things go tits up. Reaper's all up in the kitchen, Phil. Followed by, oh, leaving Earth, time to turn the music off.
Yeah.
You don't listen to that piece of music.
Well, no, or you do when you need a good cry. That's when you listen to that piece of music.
I genuinely can't cope with it. I have to skip it because I will get really upset. And for some reason, I completely forgot that obviously at the beginning of the game, when you leave Earth, they play Leaving Earth, funnily enough.
Oops, I forgot that part.
Yeah. So, pretty emotional. Also, just how stressful the beginning of Mass Effect 3 is, because you have 30 seconds of nice chat with Captain Anderson.
Look at me, I'm out of prison now. Yay, and then
yay. And she does literally walk like that.
Yeah. Down
the corridor. And then that's it. And then everything goes to total shit. And you're getting blown up by 7 or 8 Reapers. It's
running, jumping.
Really upsetting. And then you have to go to Mars and have a conversation with your ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, that was really awkward. That was really awkward. And he's rude about it, too. He's like, well, you left me. I'm like, Excuse me?
I literally
didn't
died.
leave you on Vermeer to die.
Yeah.
Bitch. What is
I
this?
let someone die for you, Caden. So
high five, Chad.
reel it in.
We play Mass Effect a very similar way. Only
Yeah.
okay.
No,
This is
Wind your neck in, Caden.
I will never now.
Okay.
I will never be able to see that dialogue wheel now without mentally pasting in "wind your neck in, Alenka."
yes, exactly. That's exactly what's happening. Fantastic.
And it felt extra awkward because for the first time I romanced Caden in the first game and then romanced Garrus in the second game, as is, sensible.
Because
now they don't give you
to
him in the first game. Right.
Yeah,
like,
rude. Yeah, so then I've got to be harsh with Caden in the third game because I'm too busy with my Turian Big Bird boy to, go back to the old human ex. So, I've got to give him the cold shoulder, which feels really bad.
I know, but he has that horrible line about like making you dinner, which is like steak and beer, the food of his people. I'm like, I wonder how. To be fair, it was Canadians who wrote that game, so I kind of let them slide by making that reference. But at the same time, then you see Garrus do the tango, and it's like, well, I've traded up,
Yeah, there is no comparison really. Let's be fair.
Isn't. Yeah, and you're saying, but here's the problem. The problem is, I always play Mass Effect, and I have all these good intentions. I'm like, I'm just going to let Alenko die, so I don't have to deal with it. And then I'm like, I'll get to 2, and I'll rescue Archie, and then Thane shows up. And I'm like... Yeah.
I really dig Thane and his whole kind of really tortured, miserable frogman thing.
I have a type. What can I say?
But the problem with Thane is, and this happened to me in my last playthrough because I did fully intend to romance Thane in Mass Effect 2 in my previous playthrough. But there's that really weird bit where you go and talk to him about his dead wife.
Yeah.
And you have this really like heart. It's so sad. And you have really heartbreaking conversation with him about his murdered wife. And basically, there's like the only romance conversation option is basically saying, well, your wife may be dead, but I want to fuck you. So
I actually have
very
context for this.
Really inappropriate.
There's context for it. The writers actually talked about this.
Yeah.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
For the chat, I think halfway through last year, the head writer on that scene was asked about it. He said, "Yeah, we ran out of time, and we couldn't get the actor back in, and it's not subtle. And basically, the only dialogue option we had was take me, Thane. Take me now."
Something like that. It was very much not well done. But the problem is, you're right, his storyline is really compelling. And when you get to the third game, there's there's a lot more context and like extra stuff.
The stuff they do with him.
Hold on, I don't know. Have you played the third game yet, John?
Oh yeah, I played it.
Fine.
When it came out, so
Citadel has.
Yeah, are we allowed to spoil Mass Effect 3? Is that?
It's 10 years old. We are.
Yeah.
Oh
if there's a remade,
I know, right?
There's a remade 4K edition now. I think we're allowed to spoil it. By the way, BioWare.
I just crumbled into dust with old age. Then.
BioWare, if you're listening, please give me the Dragon Age 4K remastered now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
please.
Yes, Mass Effect is Hot Space Boys, the BioWare game. And it's not just Space Boys. There's a lot of hot space everything.
Including space frogs.
And there is also an action-adventure star named Blasto.
This is Blasto. Blasto is basically Mel Gibson in the Lethal Weapon movies.
Yes, and the thing about his race, his race are called the Hanar, and they don't speak in the first person because they're of the way their society works. So they refer to each other as this. They describe themselves as this one. One of Hanar's, one of Blasto's best lines is, "This one does not share top billing." It's just glorious.
Who are the adorable quadrupeds who can't express emotion?
Elcor.
The Elcor are my favorite race because before everything they say, because they express emotion through pheromones, they have to basically tell humans how they're saying it.
So it's like, delightedly, it is wonderful to see you. And they all speak in that low, deep monotone. And one of the like female's mall sidekick of Blasto is an Elcor. So every sentence she says is coquettishly, we should get out of here. And then there's this great ad in the middle of Mass Effect about the original 12-hour production of Elcor Hamlet, which I just really want to see.
I mean, that's one of the reasons that Mass Effect is so good, is because of world building stuff like that, where you can have aliens that communicate completely differently.
Elcor are
and also build it into jokes.
I know.
Right? And also just rip your heart out. I mean, there are so many little discoverable stories in 3, almost all of which are impossibly sad.
Like the entire Krogan thing, the whole story, the whole arc. I would die for Rex. The first time I played that game, I spent 3 hours on that planet, convinced the cure for the genophage was hidden somewhere and I'd missed it, and I wasn't about to leave. I'm like, I'm not leaving! I can't leave Rex behind! Yeah.
Oh, bless. Yeah.
Rex is just the best. I love him.
Yeah. He is great. When you go and see him again on Mass Effect 2, and he's just like, Shepard!
He's so happy to see you.
I know.
He's so happy to see you.
And
it's
then
so
his
cute.
entrance on the 3rd game is he drops the people's elbow on a shuttlecraft for you. And I'm like, that's my boy!
Oh, bless him. I love him.
He's absolutely
But I'm genuinely kind of like worried about playing the 3rd game, because I've only played it once when it came out, and the experience was so traumatic. I never replayed it. So I've replayed 1 and 2 loads, but the 3rd one, I was just like, I'm not ready to play it again yet.
For those of you who haven't played these, Mass Effect 3 is a lot. We are genuinely not joking when we say the world ends in the first 5 minutes.
Well, Earth ends in the first 5 minutes, but
galaxy-wide war, and it's about a 100-hour game, and it gets worse.
Yeah, if you're gonna play, if you, like Wendy and I, are going to search all the couch cushions in all the Mass Effect games, set yourself aside 300 hours. Because that's what I logged across the 3 games. And that's not counting the little app game you could play at the time for the Galactic Readiness score. So, yeah, they are wonderful, and they are adventure. We should probably let Jen talk about her book.
So anyway, that's Mass Effect, but I understand you've written a new book, Jen. How'd that go?
Well,
hold on
it
a
wasn't
second.
as traumatic as Mass Effect 3.
I want to step back a second here. Hand me that.
How many had you what?
The stack.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, so you could say we are Jen Williams fans. There's one in here that's missing as well, but Jen
writes books.
Jen writes books that you can harm people with, which I approve of. But your last 10 years worth of writing-ish have all been... I know, I'm sorry, don't do the math, honey, don't do the math. Have been fantasy. And I understand there's an amusing story about how you decided to write a crime book.
Well, so I have spent a number of years writing epic fantasy. It's very long and involved. Essentially, I've always been interested in true crime, so I do a lot of reading of really unpleasant Wikipedia pages, watch a lot of Netflix documentaries, Jen and I
read a lot of true crime. Private Twitter group with a bunch of other friends, and we're constantly talking about true crime dramas.
Yes, it's true. And we're all women as well in this group, because women just love true crime. So I spend a lot of time reading that stuff, and my agent Juliet Mushins is also interested in grisly true crime. So we would often send each other links to terrible things.
That's a good relationship. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, just don't call it Murder Club. Exactly. That's why I'm in the group. I'm the lawyer. I provide the alibi, right?
See, that's really useful. I have no use at all. So I used to send her lots of links to things, and eventually she just sort of said, "Well, why don't you write a crime book? Because this is what you spend all your time looking at. And so yeah, I decided that was probably a good idea, because I do like reading, you know, crime fiction as well, and thrillers and such. So that, and also it just seemed like a really good idea to write a short book. That sounded really nice. A short book, yeah. That, you know, because all of my, as you know, all of my previous books were like, you know, 500, 600 pages. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice to write something only 90,000 words, you know?
And where you didn't have to keep an extensive list of who's this character named and where are they and what was that, and did you how did you find the world building for crime? Because most true crime is, of course, not speculative. It doesn't tend to have made up elements, or like it doesn't have magic, it doesn't have near future science fiction. It can sometimes, or and some books do, but Dog Rose Dirt is entirely real world based. So how did you find the world building approach there?
It was weird. It was a very steep learning curve, I think, is the kind way of putting it. Because the great thing with fantasy is literally you can make it all up. You know, the world building, the whole world is yours, so you can do whatever you like with it. Whereas with Dog Rose Dirt, I was very much set in the real world. So, you know, I had to do things like research into actual things, which was, you know, not something I'd really done before. But
so do you have like a murder board with red string and a map? And
please
all
tell
that
me there
stuff?
was crazy red string.
Yeah. I mean, funny enough, all of my fantasy books have murder boards. You know, they all had a cork board with post-its and red string and everything. I think I had white string, so I painted it red when I was doing fantasy.
Well, of course, I mean, it's proper. You know?
Can't not have red string.
I know, it had to be red. So
one of the things I really loved about it was some of this plays to me like a response to a lot of the bullshit that tends to infest crime fiction. Things like, I love how in the first basically 10 pages you're like, here is the incredibly smart reason why the police would sit down with my lead and go, could we have a word? Because there's something we think you could help us with. And I loved the gradation of character, the fact that
nobody's stupid.
Nobody's stupid, but at the same time, not everyone's nice. You know, the first couple of interactions she has at the prison, where firstly there is, you know, I will call him D.I. Hotness because he is D.I. Hotness. And,
bless him. Yeah.
And then his buddy, who is nothing of the sort. And you get a real sense of a world which is very varied and very diverse, and at the same time is absolutely ours. And
thank you, Al. It's the tricky thing with writing crime, I think, or that I found, and specifically a crime thriller, is like in the real world, when this stuff happened to you, if this stuff happened to you, you would be like, well, I'm phoning the fucking police, you know, or I'm going to leave this spooky house immediately and go to someone else's house and, you know, arm myself heavily. But with thrillers and crime, you kind of have to isolate the main character a bit so that they can't do those things, you know, or, you know, the situation doesn't lead them to do those things.
Yeah.
And that's hard, you know, that is hard because
you don't have those plot elements that you might otherwise have available to you. The fact that everybody has cell phones means that you have to adjust.
So annoying.
The fact that everybody has cell phones.
I hate that people have mobile phones now. It's the worst.
Yeah, I remember horror writers talking about that a lot. Like, now that the technology had become very pervasive, it just absolutely changed some of the basis and some of the kinds of hooks that they would use, because it's simply non-realistic. It becomes speculative when you tell somebody, okay, well, you're in the modern world, but you don't have a phone. You have to kind of cross over into that Black Mirror territory and say, why don't you have a phone? And what feature is that?
One of the very first jobs I had as a tiny baby journalist was, technically it was interviewing Charles Stross. In reality, it was being on the other end of the phone from Charles Stross with a tape recorder and holding on, because he could talk. And one of the first things that he said was, we are maybe 5 years off the concept of being lost, disappearing for big chunks of the Western world. And at the time I was like, yeah, sure, that's plausible, bearded, successful author man. And then 5 years later I was looking at sat-nav to get everywhere on the piece of magical frosted glass in my hand or in my pocket that was connected to every piece of knowledge on Earth. It's tough.
Yeah. It's why period pieces became so popular for a while, I'm sure, is that people were trying to artificially set events in a time period where those constraints weren't present. And you do some of that as well. There's a good chunk of the book that is, I guess it's flashback, but it's more point of view of a different character at a prior period of time.
Yeah, so it is basically, 30 odd years in the past, I suppose. So, so I mean, that's very much, I do get to spend half of the book in the past where nobody had a bloody mobile phone, which is great. And you think, actually, you'll find that a lot, I think. A lot of the crime and thrillers that I've read, a lot of them will do flashbacks and stuff because of the way that they're structured. But realism is such an issue with thrillers and with fantasy. Interestingly, I think that was the biggest change for me. Was in fantasy books, you have to convince the reader that the world, this fantastical world, is real. So you have to give them all of this information to make it feel like it's a real place.
And you have to position it in a way that they can draw those parallels. One of my biggest frustrations with, I can't remember his name now, but some big famous author who liked to make up vocabulary and then just drop the reader in it and not give any context about what the blurg was related to, and you just had to read 3,000 pages to figure it out. That's really frustrating because with fantasy, you've got to be able to do it like one at a time. You have to literally teach your readers this word means this by context. And now that you know that, I can use it as the reference point for this other word that I'm going to learn. Whereas I think the point you're making here is that with non-speculative work, it's almost the opposite. You become trapped by the real world nature of it, and you have to be really careful about how you step around it and take your audience with you when you do it. Yes, it is Neil Stevenson. Thank you very much, Chad. Dude, decided he was going to have a fight school for a while and writes books that you could literally like bludgeon people to death with, and I just gave up.
Neil Stevenson books once described as kettlebells with chapter headings.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
That's fair enough. That's a pretty good description.
So how did you approach the research? Did you draw on places you knew personally, or places that you had wanted to go, or did you steal little bits from existing criminal investigation situations, or?
I mean, in terms of setting, both timelines are kind of set in fictional places, really. So there's the place where Heather starts off, where her mother lives, which I can't remember the name of now because it's fictional. But that was roughly based on kind of the sort of grotty southeast London town where I grew up, where it's just far enough to the edge of London where it's not interesting anymore. So that's kind of, what that
you're not
sort
really
of miserable...
in London, but you're not in Kent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the sort of thing where you have like Kent appears on your address, but you have like a London Borough postcode, so none of it makes any sense. So where she lives is very much based on that area where I grew up, but slightly more suburban, I suppose, than where I actually lived. So slightly nicer than Heather's mother's house is a lot nicer than, where I grew up. That sounds really bad now that I said it. I hope my mum is not watching this.
If she is, hi, Mrs. Williams.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Mum.
And then Fiddler's Mill, which is the kind of hippie commune where a lot of the past flashbacks occurs. Yeah, that's also kind of fictional, but sort of based on, I guess, my deep-seated fear of the countryside. as a city person.
You are a Londoner through and through, Jen.
Yeah, I get very nervous if I see too much green space, basically. Yeah, and then the actual kind of serial murderiness of it is based on a lot of different cases. So it's kind of an amalgamation of several really nasty serial killers. But I also think of it as kind of like a heightened version of it. So, I mean, it's mentioned a couple of times in the book, the majority of actual serial killers are just really dreadful, small-minded idiots who are not interesting, and they're not clever. You know, they're just grim people who like to hurt other people, and that's kind of, there's no great mystery to them really. But so Michael Reeve, who is the kind of central murdery character, is kind of like several different serial killer cases that I've looked at, but heightened to kind of make it a little bit weirder than they usually tend to be, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that that was kind of the big difference between writing fantasy and crime thrillers, is that with crime thrillers you really have to kind of withhold a lot of information from the reader, whereas with fantasy you're kind of telling them everything because you want them to believe in the world. But with thrillers you don't want them to know everything. So that was kind of the biggest kind of change for me, and probably the steepest learning kind of
approach, right?
Yeah, which is not, you know, obviously in fantasy that's not really how it works.
One of the things I really responded to was actually that, and how tonally that moves the book to kind of the outskirts of crime and the outskirts of horror a couple of times. And you write a straight up horror novel at some point, please. I think you'd be very, very good at it.
Juliet, are you listening? Jen needs to write horror next.
But it's the sense of menace and the sense of kind of...
Okay, I get to tell this story. So I read the book first. I devoured it. I read it in 2 days. And then I handed it over to Alasdair, and he started reading it. And one night he read about 40, 50 pages. And then it was time for bed. And he's like, we don't have an attic, right? He got really creeped out, Chad.
It's a single line. It's a single line. It's like, yeah, anytime something bad happened, we used to blame it on the attic man. And I was like, oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
I'm out.
And the thing about that is that it's true. That is based on my family experience. That in my nan and granddad's house, there was an attic, and they did used to say, you know, if something went missing or something got broken, they would be like, oh, I guess the man in the loft did it, you know. So that was like a real thing. Sorry. I mean, I don't mean that there was actually a man in our loft, because as far as I know, there wasn't, you know.
I always find it weirdly reassuring when I find out that other people have stories like that. The closest I have to it, the kind of 4-level Victorian terrace house that I grew up in, had pull chains on the loose, and because I basically lived on a small rock in the middle of the Irish Sea, you had to park further away from the house than you wanted. So in the morning when we go to school, my mum would go and get the car and drive it round, and I'd hustle my dad out the front door. And we were standing in the front entrance waiting for her to come round. And this pull chain on the toilet made a really distinctive noise. It was like, and it had to have something being pulled on it. And we heard it. And there was no one else in the house. And my dad...
Who's using the toilet?
And my dad looked at me and went, that's the toilet, isn't it? And I went, yeah. And he went, shall we wait outside? And I went, yeah.
See, this is because you're both city mice. If you grew up in the country, we don't have those problems. You have wild creatures. You don't have ghosts. You don't have as many ghosts.
Well, it says, going, you all get out the toilet. What you doing?
No, well, not quite that.
You got like raccoons in your toilet instead of ghosts or something.
Probably. Yeah.
Tower of raccoons holding onto the chain. Going, I know this looks awkward.
4 rats. Yes, exactly. 4
That would be
rats in a
so much
trash
better
can.
than a ghost. I would love that.
The other thing which I find myself thinking about an awful lot with this book is like I say, crime and horror both have a deservedly appalling reputation for doing just awful shit to female characters. And the thing which I love about this, purely and completely, is that your lead is never without agency. She is also rarely in possession of the answers, but she's no one's victim. And there's a line which really jumps out early on where she's talking to Reeve, and he says, "So what? It's something like, so what do I have to do to get you to call me Michael?" And her response is, "I don't know, not murder a load of women."
Yeah. Oh, Heather. Yeah, she's
I think the connective tissue between characters like Wydron and Noon and Vintage and Heather is very you. There have been so many times where I've been reading this, I'm like, oh, that's such a Jen line. Because your characters, your female characters especially, just take no shit. They are not here for it. And to see that positioned in a real world scenario where, the conventional narrative of the role that Heather fills in this kind of story is usually of the last victim, i.e. the point of view we look through, and then she dies at the end, the final girl. But Heather is not a final girl. She very much has her own decision-making ability, even though she has her own... She's hooked. She is dragged along this narrative because there are things that she needs out of it, but there are also things that she really isn't happy that she learns as a result of this.
Yeah, she's an interesting character to write because she's quite angry a lot of the time. In fact, I think of the initial drafts of Dog Roast Dirt, she was a lot angrier actually, to the point where I kind of had to tone it down a bit because it was distracting, I suppose. But I mean, you're right. It is a thread that runs from all of my kind of main female characters, is that they don't have any time for your shit, I think is the kind of, that's the banner over them. They just don't have any time for it. They've got a lot of stuff to do. They haven't got time for your nonsense. And I think I can't not do that with that holds me back in some ways, I guess. But in terms of a main character in a crime book, I really didn't want her to spend a lot of time being a victim, because it's a big issue with crime and thrillers, is that you can spend a lot of time seeing women as victims in those books, and it's a subject that I thought about a lot while I was writing it, because as you know, in the fantasy books that I write, I'm also not keen on showing women as victims. I don't like to put a lot of violence against women in my books, especially fantasy books. But there comes a point, I think, when you're writing about a male serial killer, the reality of it is that they tend to target women. And in fact, in terms of violence, you're often talking in real world terms about men being violent to women, and I don't think it's helping anyone to pretend that doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
So was that like a conscious decision on your part? Because I know that there's like a movement right now in crime to try and this sounds really strange to put it this way, but it's the only way I can describe it, which is to bring equality to victimhood, and that there are more attempts to show violence towards other groups of people in the kind of crime narrative setting, and there is justifiably some pushback against that as well. It's the whole kill your gays scenario of, are you bringing these people here to have authentic experiences, or are you bringing these people here so that it's not just predominantly young white middle-class women who are being murdered by sexually frustrated 40-year-old white males,
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is such a complicated and messy discussion. I think that there's stuff on every side, really, that you could easily make a convincing argument out of. But, I don't think ultimately I mean, given the amount of research that I did and all the serial killers that I looked at, and I don't think it's actually helpful to pretend that isn't the case, you know. And it was something that I tried to address in the book a couple of times, you know, talking about the sort of people who tend to be serial killers. You know, I mean, you can't really escape the fact that female serial killers are pretty rare, actually, you know. So in the end, what we're talking about is something that is most often a male monster.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and I didn't want, you know, it was a difficult thing to kind of balance, because you know, I wanted to have female characters with agency, but I also needed a load of people to die, you know, because it's a book about serial killer. So what I did is try to give the victims their own story, you know, even if they don't get a lot of time on the page. I tried to give them as much personality and realness as I could, to say, you know, these are real people that are getting
you succeeded.
killed off.
One of those situations, I threw the book. I literally was like, ah! When something happened, because I had empathized with that character. I was like, oh, okay, I like this lady. I don't think this is going to go well. And then something happened and I threw the book. And then I went and got it and I finished what was happening. So I really appreciated that you did provide. I almost wish there was opportunity to do a bit more, to have given more context to those people. But that's a personal bias on my point.
Speaking to that point, thank you. You've actually helped me articulate one of the things the book reminds me of. There is, I think, a 5-part examination of the hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper on a podcast called On Claire, which Wendy in the chat knows very well. It's a forensic anthropology and linguistics podcast, and it's amazing. And one of it's very, very hard listening, inevitably. But one of the things that makes it so good is it explores at tremendous length and detail the type of person, who the Yorkshire Ripper preyed on, and why these were his chosen victims, and why these victims were largely ignored by society at the time. And it's a very... I hesitate to use the word female gaze. It's a very fair-minded, very different perspective on a horrifying case, and this reminded me very much of that.
Yeah, it takes the point of view of everybody knows who Jack the Ripper is, but nobody knows the names of his victims. And instead of censoring the villain of the piece, the person responsible for the murders, On Claire and your book to some extent makes a real effort to center the experiences of the victims and to give them context, which doesn't happen a lot of time, especially in things like airport criminal thrillers, where, you know, it's 80 pages worth of dirt gently meat chest and I shall save the dame and there's the redhead and there's the bad guy that I instantly recognize and then I'll deal with my alcoholism and have an angst and then there's a punch up and I win. The end. You know, it's very, very easy to have that kind of narrative experience.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I mean the Yorkshire Ripper thing, because I think there's a few documentaries about it, and I've listened to that podcast and it is amazing. And there was a documentary, can't remember what it was called, but it did talk specifically about how damaging it was that the police of the time essentially assumed that all the victims would be the same, and that was why he was allowed to kind of carry on, because they didn't listen to what people were saying. They made these huge assumptions about the victims, and then you end up with more people dying. So the Yorkshire Ripper is incredibly infuriating, but was definitely one of the cases that I looked at in terms of research for Dog Roast Dirt, because it's almost kind of set around about the same time.
And it does have that sort of it is kind of in the northern part of England, and it has more of that kind of I don't know what I want to say, that feel to it. It has more of that context.
Yeah, it's kind of gritty, I guess. You know, it's a gritty case.
Well, this is pretty grisly as well, isn't it? I mean, we could probably spend... that's a whole nother hour. We could probably spend a whole nother hour talking about... okay, content warnings. We're going to start talking about victims and bodies here, everybody. Yeah. So just please be warned. Mods, if you wouldn't mind throwing the content warning in the chat again, I'd appreciate it. But we could spend a whole hour talking about this, the ritualized presentation of victims and how so often women are murdered and posed and dressed and displayed. And, you know, the killer is telling their story and giving their presentation through the dismemberment of these women. And there is an aspect of that to your killer in this book. But they're more than just a ritualistic presentation. There is an almost mythological component to that in this book. And I loved when I started getting those elements because I was like, oh, this is very Jen. She's done such a good job of, you know, tapping into those, you know, fantasy skills and kind of dragging along the idea of, you know, the underneath storytelling that people emotionally attach to and adapt and adopt and get into that. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you kind of came up with, I hesitate to say justification, but kind of that feel that you brought to, you know, what could otherwise just really be a very grim, well, I don't like you, so I'm going to stab you kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, it was like I said previously, I wanted the serial killer in this book to be this sort of heightened version of a serial killer. So it's worth saying, you know, most serial killers are not doing anything this fancy with, you know, with bodies and such because they're just not that clever. But though I wanted to bring in a kind of, I guess, as you say, like a mythological aspect to it, because I've always been...
murder, as the chat has said. Fancy murder!
Fancy murders, yes.
With doilies.
I've always had this, a big love for, obviously, for fairy tales and folklore and such, and I really wanted that to be a big part of this book. And so in the book, Michael Reeve becomes very fascinated with fairy tales and folklore because of an association he has with another character, and that kind of in turn led me to write his sections almost in a kind of fairy tale way. So
very much so, yeah. It's a stylistic twist to the flashback pieces that I really liked.
Yeah, they are they're differently written, I guess, to the kind of, you know, the present tense chapters. They are quite a different style, and I really wanted, because one of the things that I really enjoy thinking about is kind of how does any character get to be who they are? You know, that's kind of at the heart of being a writer, is understanding how characters end up in that place. And I kind of wanted to apply that to, you know, a serial killer. So how does a serial killer end up in this place? So I went right back, you know, to sort of the origin of him, and then presented, you know, his story in kind of a series of flashbacks that are kind of like a kind of fable-ish, I suppose.
They have that kind of, it's like you're looking at the events occurring through glass. There is that almost emotional cognitive distance, that little gap between you and what the character is experiencing, that kind of gives it that whole Vaseline on the lens flair of this is not like a lived experience. This is almost a remembered experience, which gave it a really good,
because you do have to have a bit of distance.
Yeah.
You know, because, I mean, ultimately, the things that I'm asking you to experience and understand are really terrible things. So, you know, there's only so far that your empathy can go, essentially. So there is a kind of, you have to sort of maintain a kind of distance. And because ultimately, I think they were... Sorry.
No, you finish your point. I'm sorry.
I was just, you know, they were kind of the most fun to write, which sounds terrible, obviously.
But they are, you know...
fancy murders. I like writing fancy murders. They're kind of, because each chapter was almost like its own weird horror story, I suppose, when it came to them.
Because that's the horrible flip side sometimes of crime, or true crime specifically, is the charisma, the emotional fixation, it kind of, I mean, serial killers and cult leaders tend to go really hand in hand, and it's because they have those charismatic, arresting personalities that makes it very easy for them to center themselves in narratives, and therefore, use that as a way to deny responsibility or to get away with things. And you walk a very fine line, I think, with Matthew as we meet him in the book. You make it very clear that this is someone who could be a cult leader if he wanted to. He has the skills, but there's something else going on there, and through the course of the book you show us what it is that's going on there. And at the end of the book, you have a very different view of Matthew, but I still don't think it does that really easy tropey thing of tipping over into being, I've made the bad guy into a relatable, resonant character. The thing that they're doing with all the Disney villains right now.
It wasn't Cruella de Vil's fault.
You know what? I don't need you to justify this woman's decision to murder 100 animals. I'm really okay with that,
Just, let her be obsessed with fur coats. That's fine. That's enough of a motive. It's tough because, there is a really fine line to walk, because I wanted to make, a character who is essentially doing really terrible things also interesting. And I wanted you to keep coming back to find out more about him. But also, he's murdering people.
But also have in the pit of your stomach the fact that you would not really want to be sitting with where Heather is across the table from him.
Yeah, he has to be scary. He has to be scary, but he also has to be interesting. And I think that's the thing that I find interesting about serial killers in general, is that we want to know why they do these things, but the reality of it is that we can't really understand it, because I think in order to truly empathize with what they're doing, you have to have a piece of yourself missing, which we don't have.
And there's Hannibal in a single sentence.
Absolutely.
The fact that they put Will in that position of, well, the only way to truly understand a serial killer is to be one, and you're like, you've shown us, no, I can understand this guy without then being compelled to go out and do what he's doing.
Yeah, it's a classic crime fiction trope. It's how close can you get to a killer before you're also in that really dark place. I think.
I wonder whether that's one of the reasons why we keep circling back to some of these folks. There was a thing I saw on Twitter today, and it was one of those increasingly rare perfect tweets that just resonates with you. And it was, there is no reason on earth why any piece of media should be focused on Ted Bundy in 2021. And I was just like, of course. But because of what he did, and because it was so awful, there was this gravitational pull to circle back around. And maybe this time you can hack it. Maybe this time you can understand. And
that's it exactly, I think.
It's a redemption arc. It's people are like, well, if I understand him, I can fix him, And that is a trope of, I think, the way most women are traditionally socialized. Is, we're brought up to believe, or at least women of my generation were brought up to believe that, finding a fixer-upper is part of your life's ambition, that you're supposed to... No, honey, I love you very much, not you. But there is, my mom's generation, certainly, there was that expectation that you would find a partner that you would fix. And there is that emotional compulsion and a lot of people who prey on that absolutely prey into it. I mean, you see it now in grooming behavior and in, stalking and all of that sort of stuff. It's that same sort of thing of you are entranced by me and I use that fact to my advantage.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of, it's still all around, unfortunately. I think you see that a lot, particularly in things like those terrible Reddit relationship posts.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
What would we do without Am I the Asshole?
Oh, God. And there are clearly still loads of women out there who think it's totally reasonable to have.
Did you see the one that today was like, my partner thinks I'm cheating on him because I'm reading fantasy books? I'm like, drop his bitch ass! Go to the library!
Yeah. I mean, what? I mean, the way that whole thing was phrased, where she said, my boyfriend won't allow me to read books. And it's like, first of all, spin that back and have a look at what you just said. Why is your boyfriend allowing you to do anything? What does that even mean?
Yeah. If your girlfriend texted you that about her boyfriend, what would you say? Right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's probably a percentage of all that stuff that is just people writing made up stories just for the notoriety of it. But unfortunately, I think there is still, plenty of people who think that that's an entirely normal and reasonable relationship to have, where you're the woman constantly running around after a 40-year-old child, who thinks that you're his mum, who's here to buy his clothes and wash his dishes,
And be constantly graded on a curve as well.
Yeah.
I have so many
and as I said earlier, I haven't got time
that I'm just not going to say.
Yeah.
So many comments I can make here about authors who think wives are secretaries, and who's the guy who wrote The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner again?
Oh, I forget the name, but I know the book.
And isn't he the one who had his mom make him sandwiches every day when he was out there roughing it in the wild? I'm like, yeah, jog on, buddy. Okay.
The
That's not roughing it if someone's making you sandwiches.
Right?
Are you thinking of the guy who shows up in Dickinson, played by John Mulaney, who has his mum do his ironing for him?
I don't even, folks. Come on.
What can you even say? Exactly. What can you even say?
So are you hooked? Are you thinking you're going to write more standalone crime, or is there are there more books in this universe that you want to play with, or is this intentionally I want to do done-in-ones now?
Well, that particular one is a standalone, and I am writing another crime thriller standalone. So there is at least going to be one more.
Yay!
Brilliant.
One more, I think.
And then you're going to write a horror novel.
And then a horror novel. Do you know what? I have written a horror novella that is coming out at some point, but I don't know when.
Can I ask from whomst?
Or do you know yet?
I don't think I'm allowed to say yet, actually.
Well, we've skipped ahead to the end where we ask you the exciting new stuff. So
I have a couple of suspicions, given its format, and I will make inquiries accordingly.
I don't mean I can just tell you on the chat.
Yeah.
Afterwards,
but down low. When we're not, hi Mom, hi Juliet, don't kill Jen, please. We're not trying to make her confess anything.
Stamp the sniper down.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. But good.
Yeah. So there is. I mean, I love horror. I have read horror.
I've read your fantasy books. I know you love horror.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of people die horribly in my fantasy books, and I do blame that on the fact that I just read Stephen King growing up. So. I mean, I was a big horror fan when I was a kid. So it's kind of, it's like my origin, really, because I read horror before I read fantasy. So,
and I think it's a UK thing more so, because in the US, fantasy and horror have very distinct approaches. They're considered very different genres. They're marketed different. They're shelved different. In the UK, you guys peanut butter and chocolate with your horror and your fantasy. There's a lot of overlap in that space. So you have good cross skills. I think it would be.
The Dark Tower is either the best horror series ever made, aside from one volume, or one of the best fantasy series ever made, aside from one volume, depending on where you stand.
Oh Lord! I mean, if you want like a whole extra hour of podcast, we could talk about the Dark Tower and my feelings about many things.
as long as we can also talk about Kingdom Hospital and my theory that was what he was. The Kingdom Hospital is what happens when you write a TV show on painkillers.
I mean, that was bonkers, wasn't it?
Oh God, yes.
I kind of want to watch it again just to see if what I remember is true, because I'm not sure if it can be.
The armadillo was real.
Give some context for that.
Kingdom Hospital was the US adaptation of a Lars von Trier 10-hour Dutch horror miniseries called The Kingdom. It was adapted by Stephen King. He, of course, appears in it. It has, I would say...
Best part of his career, as far as I'm concerned, is you can write your own cameos.
Possibly the most beautiful opening credit sequence of the late 20th century. And it kind of wanders around a bit. It's like if Twin Peaks was driven at tremendous velocity sideways into a mid-run season of ER, is the best way to describe it.
So...
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It was super weird, and I really want to look it up again now.
Okay.
And there is a colossal armadillo who might be a god of death, who sounds a little bit like Fonzie, and tends to use the phrase, "You do me a solid, I'll do you a solid."
Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, but for real.
Basically, yeah. That's a perfect description, Andrew.
Well done.
Wasn't it kind of out at the same time as Garth Marenghi's Dark Place? It's kind of, because I remember watching them together, weirdly. But that is kind of, the weirder bits of the Dark Tower are definitely kind of on par with Kingdom Hospital.
Absolutely. Although, of course, now all I can think of is I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards, which might be one of the best lines ever written.
So talk to us a little bit about why you have two different titles.
Yeah, what happened with that?
And can you hold them both up for the chat so they can see? Because I only have... So this is the UK version of the book, but in the US, Jen...
That's the proof version. This is the
fancy version.
So this is the fancy hardback. My first ever hardback, by the way.
Dude, nice.
And it's got, you can't really see it, but those are like light green end papers.
Oh.
Very nice.
Very sexy.
Oh. And a bit of rose gold on the
check you
blocking
out.
there. Nice, isn't it?
Very nice. We'll have to get one of those for the friend shelf, because we just have the proof right now.
Yeah, it's lovely. And it smells really nice. Too. And then the American version is
a different title, A Dark and Secret Place.
A Dark and Secret Place. Yeah, so
what was the thinking behind that? Marketing, obviously, but
it's marketing.
Yeah.
This book went through, I think, probably about 8 or 9 different titles from the beginning. So it's because all of my fantasy books, I thought of the title and that was it. It was done. That was the title. We moved forward. But with Dog Rose Dirt, it kind of checked, because it went through a lot of different kind of versions as I was kind of learning how to write thrillers. So each time it was a different version, it had a different title. And then eventually we kind of settled on Dog Rose Dirt was one of the ones that I came up with, and I liked it because it was very weird. And so the UK went with that one. And then the US publisher wanted to go with something else, which is kind of it kind of happens a lot. It's kind of standard with publishing. You often end up with a different title. So the Polish version of this book is going to be called Red Wolf.
No, of course it is. Of course it is. Oh, I can't wait to see the cover, Jen. You have to share.
Oh, well, yeah, I shall post it up. But it's because Red Wolf was one of the original titles that it was called at a couple of years ago, or whenever I originally wrote it. So the Polish title is The Red Wolf, and the German title, I think, is going to be called The Heart Grabber, or something like that. So
that's
you
tend to have 25
to get
syllables. It's going to be amazing.
Are there umlauts?
Yeah. I mean, they all look incredible in these different languages. They always look great.
I can't wait to see the shelf behind you with all the different titles of all the different versions.
I know, it's going to be so cool.
Really cool.
Yeah. So it's fairly normal for you to have different different titles in different territories, basically.
Let's see, we have
But
somebody
it does
in the chat
make
who speaks German, and she says it's the Heart Digger. Herzgraber?
Heart Digger. Oh, brilliant.
That's even better.
See,
I
that's
can't
even
speak
better,
German.
yeah.
And there are umlauts. I'm happy. Thank you very much, Ocean. That was really useful.
Yeah.
But nice.
They can't
So-
name Ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So, that's one of the best things about, you know, having foreign editions is all the different covers and all the different titles. It's really exciting.
Yeah. Is this the first book you've had with foreign rights souls, or did you sell foreign rights with other books? I don't
The
remember.
Copper. Neither can I, to be honest. The Copper. I think the Copper Cat and possibly the Iron Ghost sold in the Netherlands, and I think the Copper Promise, sold in Germany. I think. So yeah, they had exciting foreign titles, which I can't remember now. It's like I do have them somewhere behind me, but
Garrus is
I won't
keeping
drag
an eye on
them all out.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's Vicarian security is on the case. You know.
Vicarian security. I love it. Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit more about what else you have coming up. What's kind of like what's next for you? I mean, you've told us you have some things kind of in the hopper, but are you doing? It's weird to ask this, but some people are doing convention appearances and some aren't. Do you have any other upcoming events and such, or?
Thanks,
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's weird, isn't it? Everything's kind of in limbo, but I am vaguely intending to go to FantasyCon this year, so that will probably happen, I think. I mean, it's probably, it might be online, but yeah, my vague plans to be there, and guess that's kind of it in terms of appearances, because there's nowhere to appear. But I'm doing a what do you call it, a Facebook live thing with Katie Lowe.
Katie Lowe, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's on the 20th of the month, I think, a couple of days before the book comes out.
Who has also stepped across to straight up crime, hasn't she?
Yes. Yeah. So she wrote. She's got The Murder of Graham Catton coming out, which is great. I read a proof of it, and it is brilliant. Very twisty, and really kind of current, because it's all about murder. You know, like true crime podcasts. So,
Gee, I wonder
very
what those are
on
like.
it.
Yeah. No, I love it. That's fantastic.
So it's great. So yeah, I'm having a chat with her on the 20th. On Facebook, I think. So yeah, that's going to be fun, because we both quite like dark, murdery things. So that will be a fun chat.
Top 5 serial killers, go! Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, dream conversation. And apart from that, there's the horror novella that I can't say much about yet, and
yes,
not yet been announced. And I am still writing a fantasy book, because I can't really leave them behind, I suppose. So
standalone or a series?
I think it's a series. I think it's probably a trilogy.
Grabby hands.
Good.
Grabby hands.
More. Good. Thank you.
Good. More.
Yeah. So I've been trying to kind of write it in between everything else. So it's very, very slowly becoming a thing. But I'm hoping once I've finished editing the second thriller, I can dive back into writing this fantasy book, because it's been ages since I've had to write about flying animals or magic or giant bats or whatever. So obviously I need to get back in.
I mean, you do miss it. I miss it.
So. I do.
Yeah. And I mean, you do it so well. Some of the imagery in the second trilogy in particular, the whole kind of frozen in amber thing, and the combination of colossal, amazing animals and just terrifying, horrible carnage is... Yes. And of course, the second best himbo you've ever written, because my heart belongs to Sebastian.
Oh, Sebastian.
Yes. So Ninth Reign is the first book in Jen's latest fantasy trilogy. Folks who like Ursula Vernon's middle-aged women who take no shit, meet Vintage.
Vintage
That's
is the
all
best.
I'm gonna say. Go find a copy of that at your library or pick up a copy. It is phenomenal.
And the only one which we don't have a copy of to hand, which is
this is the BFA winner, isn't it? Is it Ninth Reign?
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that one.
Yep.
And the Bitter Twins. Yeah.
The only one.
I mean, I miss those guys a lot.
I do. Do you want to tell the story about a specific character name?
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
You should. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, gosh, I mean, how much setup do you need? But there's a character in the Winnowing Flame trilogy, who actually became quite a fan favorite. People are always contacting me about him. They love him. Anyway, so thinking up fantasy names is really hard, actually, and I spend a lot of time sweating over it. And then Alasdair told me that someone had sent you an email. Was it an email where they'd spelt your name wrong?
Hotel Chocolat signed me up to their newsletter with my name spelt completely but wrong.
Yeah.
So it's at Hotel Chocolat. I've forgotten that bit because that's brilliant. So they had spelt Alasdair's name as Alasdair, which I kind of went, well, I'm going to have that as a fantasy name because that's great.
Yes.
So that was it. Yeah, so he's one of the main characters, really, especially in the last two books.
Yeah.
And definitely a fan favorite because people love him because he's a very sweet.
He's very sweet.
Messed up cinnamon roll.
He's not quite a himbo, but he's close.
No.
He has a lot of feelings.
He has a lot of feelings and a wonderful
boyfriend. He has a lot of feelings, yes, bless him. And he doesn't really understand them either. So
I'm trying to remember how. It's Aldasair. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah. Bless Alasdair. Yeah, he's very sweet.
He's very sweet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still very proud of those books, and I miss those characters a lot. You know, they were. It was a very emotional journey writing that trilogy. So, you know, I think of them fondly all the time.
Most of us would follow Vintage into hell.
Yes.
Thank you. Please do give us the opportunity.
Absolutely. You know.
Yeah.
There's such lovely problem solving scattered throughout those books, and it's something I never encountered before I found yours. That at the moment, I think this is not spoiling very much at all in the first one, where they hit a problem and Vintage is like, "No, it's okay. I invested heavily in infrastructure. There's a railway here.
Yeah.
I own it.
Yeah. And I'm like, whoa, you are my hero. Take that, Batman. You know, two can play in this game.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the hardest thing often about writing fantasy, especially epic fantasy, is getting people anywhere. You know, like traveling.
Travel, yeah,
exactly. So annoying. Yes, because you kind of like, I mean, if you're talking about kind of like a pre-industrial age, like how do you fucking move anyone around?
Right.
Because it's a lot of walking or riding horses, and who can be bothered with the upkeep of horses? Jesus.
Yeah, exactly.
So essentially, yeah, in the Winnowing Flame trilogy, I was like, do you know what? Vintage is very rich. She loves science. She's invested in what is basically the railway. So we can we can have a train that takes her,
exactly.
across the map.
The way I always think of describing these is, if you took a Studio Ghibli movie and you cross it with a Stephen King novel, that would be the setting of the Winnowing Flame.
Yeah, I mean, that is essentially my, two of my biggest influences, so that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Princess Mononoke in particular.
Mononoke specifically, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, was very much something that I kept in mind while I was writing those books, and particularly Noon as well. That kind of image of somebody who came from this kind of nomad people and finds themselves. She's not a warrior princess, but she kind of is.
She finds herself in a position where she has influence and power, whether she wants it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely, especially in the third book.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely. I mean, Studio Ghibli was such a huge, huge influence on me, and anime in general, probably. That, that plus video games, plus Stephen King plus Terry Pratchett plus Robin Hobb equals me, probably.
That is the Jen Williams Venn diagram. You should totally draw that now. That sounds fantastic.
That equation.
With red string.
With red string. Gotta have the red string.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All connected together. Yeah.
That sounds great.
Exactly.
Any final thoughts, questions?
We've covered pretty much everything.
Yeah, we've gone all around the houses. I mean, I guess my next question is, okay, so you've written fantasy and it's won awards. You've written crime and I hope it is a ridiculous commercial success for you. I fully expect to watch the Netflix movie of Dog Rose Story in a few years. That would be really great, Jen. That would be amazing.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. You've got horror coming up and you're returning to fantasy. Is sci-fi not your thing? Have you ever wanted to dabble in it?
Do you know what? I was talking to Marty about
Write a horror romance novel. There we go.
I think, I mean, science fiction is one of my big loves. As I'm sure that both of you know.
Yeah.
You know, I'm such a huge Star Trek fan, such a huge Star Wars fan.
Garrus.
Farscape. There's so much science fiction stuff that I've been obsessed with since I was a kid. So part of me really does want to write at some point, some sort of really sort of crash bang rogues in space kind of novel. But
you would kick so much ass at that.
It would be so much fun, but it's fitting it in around everything else.
Yeah,
it's kind of, but I do, I do have, ideas written down and like outlines sketched out for various idiots in a spaceship novels that
I want really a Jen Williams Idiots in a Spaceship novel so bad.
That would be so much fun.
I know.
But
did you see what was it called? Space Sweepers.
Oh no, I didn't. I saw it on. It was on Netflix, wasn't it? I haven't watched it, but it did look like fun.
You gotta watch that, and you're gonna completely fall in love with it, and then you're gonna yell at me, and you're like, "Now I have to write an Idiots in a Spaceship book."
It is one of the best Idiots in a Spaceship stories I've ever seen, and Bob's the android walks away with the movie.
My heart.
Okay, I would definitely watch that because
sounds really, really good.
I do. Obviously, with Farscape especially, I have a big sort of soft spot for just idiots and rogues messing things up on a spaceship.
You will love this movie. That's all I'm going to say. You have to go watch it and tell me. Because
very little has brought me more joy than 4 seasons of the Farscape characters going, "Oh, we fucked it."
Yeah.
Okay, so somehow
every episode. Fucked it again. Amazing.
I know. That sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for being here, Jen. This has been really fantastic. Everybody,
thanks for having me.
Tell everybody where to pre-order and release dates and all that good stuff.
Oh yes, okay. So, so A Dark and Secret Place, the US version is already out in the States. I think it came out on the 22nd of June.
Cool.
So I imagine you can get it from any amazing bookshop in America. Yay. Mm-hmm. The UK version, is out on the 22nd of July.
22nd of July, so just a few weeks.
Couple of weeks, yeah. So that's, it's up, it's there.
Yep, it's available for purchase. Request it from your local library, and if they don't have it, tell them you need it. All that good stuff. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And
if you go to, I think it's bookshop.org, that sort of newish website, you can choose to kind of order it online, but a local indie bookshop will get a percentage of the money. So
nice.
It is such a good service.
It looks like the German version
it's really great.
Is out in time for Christmas, so it'll be out December. And there's an audiobook version as well.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know very much about the audio versions, but they are happening. So
do you know anything about who's reading them?
Technically I do, but I don't remember.
That's fine. That's totally fine. Thanks for putting the links in the chat, everybody. We appreciate it. That sounds great. Okay.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah,
thanks for coming on, Jen.
And
It's
everybody.
lovely to see your faces.
I know.
You too.
We haven't seen you in person since
Glasgow.
Glasgow.
Were you at Glasgow?
I wasn't at Glasgow.
So Chester. The year
God, Jen,
before.
it might be 3 years.
Don't do math.
Oh
Math is scary.
no! Don't make me feel old again.
Oh,
Jesus.
God.
Oh no! One of these days we'll be able to do
Anyway.
pubs and safety again,
Yes.
and we will have to get together in
Yes.
person. That sounds amazing.
That would be amazing.
We'll go to Byron as we did in the olden times.
Yes, have a burger.
Yes, burgers.
That sounds fantastic. We'll have all the links in the show notes for you, everybody. We're going to take a little break for a bit and say goodnight to Jen, and then we will be back with shenanigans. So we'll see you in a few.
Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to the magnificent flotilla of raiders from Ashen. Hey, folks, how are you doing? We just did an hour and a bit's interview with Jen Williams, award-winning fantasy and now crime author. That will obviously be on the VOD shortly. And now we're going to check in with you all and close out the night with some Magnus Archive-style shenanigans. I am, as ever, Alasdair. 8 feet to my left is the amazing Marguerite, who is not currently in a small box. To my right, I as well. And let's go.
That sounds good. You want to show Chungus while you're at it?
Yes, of course. For those of you worried, the yeasty lad is in very, very good form indeed.
We decided he might want to wear something planty for Jen's book.
Dog roses, you see. Bitey ones.
Bitey dog roses.
And, one more time, Dog Rose Dirt by Jen Williams. Or, if you're in the US, A Dark and Secret Place. It is absolutely fantastic.
Rightio. Shall we do some shenanigans?
Let's do some shenanigans. There was a brief, very intense discussion over how this word is pronounced, and we discovered whole new ways to not pronounce it, which I'm quite excited about and will not be using. This is a piece from AO3, and it's by Dribbled Scribbles, and it's called Chamomile. Whatever the XT was, if it really had ever been that last bag of chamomile Martin claimed he'd found tucked in the back of the cupboard, it was fast now. Martin had tried catching it, chasing it, blocking its way with shoebox lids and plates, and an upended footstool, but the thing was just too quick. John knew, as well as knew, that he might have left off the attempts completely, if not for the creature's preferred game. The game was, see how many times I can push Martin towards cardiac arrest before he comes at me with the broom. It played this game by hiding in any number of places, tucking itself inside actual food, or in a slipper, or behind a corner, or under a chair, or in the curtains, or in the shower, just waiting for footsteps. Do I need to do a content warning? Sorry, just to jump back.
We already have.
Cool.
Yeah. Content warnings are in the chat.
Then, the second Martin was close enough, it scuttle-sprinted into view, sparking another round of yelping swears as it made its escape. Other times, it relied on its oldest trick, disguising itself as whatever innocuous thing Martin was looking for. It would wait until Martin trusted that it was what it looked like, until A, Martin tried to press a button on the remote, only to have it erupt into the awful chittering thing that it really was, producing vocalizations that ranged from a shout to a shriek. Or B, John ruined the fun too early, stopping Martin short of actually touching it. The thing didn't know what to think of John. John knew. John did not react to it, or to any of the other alterations the little house had made to itself. Unless John was actively interacting with Martin, he was usually stationary. He would find a place to stand, or to sit, or to lay down, and just not move until Martin's presence dictated he must. If the thing hadn't known better, it would have assumed John was just another piece of the household that had gained sentience. A former coat rack, maybe. But no, John was John. Whatever John was, and he was similar enough in make to Martin that he should, logically, be part of the game too. Only as time went on, the thing realized John simply refused to react to it, beyond a disinterested glance. Perhaps a glare when it had just finished shocking Martin into a fresh panic, but never terribly much more. The most it had ever gotten out of him was a flat, "Stop that," spoken into a shampoo bottle. He was not in the shower, but hunched over the sink, not wanting to waste any hot water for Martin's turn. He waited. The shampoo bottle had not replied. John gave up, pointed it at his palm, and squeezed out what someone else would have believed to be a normal glop of shampoo. It was, of course, the XT, doing its best to remain glop-shaped, waiting to be, accidentally, applied to John's scalp with hilarious results. The illusion was helped by the fact that it was so cleverly masked by a sheen of actual shampoo. It waited. John sighed. Goodness, what a completely innocent heap of hair product that is. I trust it entirely. The creature kept itself from shuddering in victory. Having nothing better to do and no energy left to convince himself he did, John lifted the thing up to his damp head. It abruptly flung off its disguise, all spindly legs and hisses. John didn't move. He stared at the chipped mirror, blandly marvelling at the image of his own calm. It was funny to think how grateful he'd have been for this mock composure, not a month ago well-assorted horrors used him for their chew toy. Now he just doesn't care. And doesn't care that he doesn't care. The thing skittering around on his head noticed as much. So it tried harder. It tugged at his hair, climbed down the back of his head, raced around his neck, scuttled back and forth on his shoulders, nipped him on the ear, battered at his jaw, hissed, chittered. John had dealt with worse. Hell, the Admiral had inoculated him ages ago to the pincushion treatment. He put a dollop of real shampoo in his hand and started to lather. The thing paused on his tilted shoulder. The scattered beads of its eyes stared up at him with a vague sense of insult. It pinched his arm. Ow. Pinched him again. Ow. Scratch, bite, it all healed. Move. John ducked his head under the tap to rinse. The thing climbed up to squat between his shoulder blades and paced there, feeling like unclipped nails anxiously drumming on his spine. When John righted himself, it clung, digging in with a clawing grip. Are you done? The thing hesitated on his back, fumbling with the appendages that weren't clinging to him. Then it was clambering down his leg. John watched it shoot to the place just beside the bathroom door, folding into the shape of a dropped washcloth that an unsuspecting Martin might go to pick up. No, you don't get to do that. Out. The washcloth hissed. John crouched down beside it. I mean it. You don't do this in the bathroom. Common courtesy. The washcloth opened several glaring eyes. Claws, mandibles, and nested teeth peeked out from the illusion of terry cloth. John opened a few of his eyes back. No. It was more than a word. The air flinched with the duty of holding it. The washcloth was no longer a washcloth, but a dark little jumble of anatomy, pressing itself as flat against the floor as it could. Its eyes were open much, much wider. John closed his eyes with a sigh. No bathroom. Understand? An impulse came to him, mingled with the sad acknowledgement that he was tired of calling this thing, all the other new things that turned up post-change, a thing. Even with all his knowing, it got old, trying to keep all the different things straight. So, you understand me, chamomile. Not here. No bathroom. To his threadbare surprise, the thing, chamomile, actually slither-skittered to the door. John watched it watch him as it squeezed under the crack and left. A moment later, Martin shouted. A happy scuttling fled down the hall ceiling and was gone. Shower's yours, John called. That should have been the end of it. Chamomile disagreed. Chamomile did so by becoming John's tiny, irritating shadow. While Martin was glad of the decrease in ambushes, he was infinitely less glad to spot Chamomile racing in frantic laps around and sometimes, in fact, on John's person. It climbed on him, jumped on or off him, pounced on whatever book he was pretending to read, and if it was feeling daring, simply clung to John's face for a staring contest. When Martin went to lay a hand on John's shoulder and Chamomile burst out from under the shirt collar with a chittering victory cry, he drew the line. John, seriously, you can't let that thing keep crawling on you. Who knows if it's got, eldritch diseases on it or something. I know it doesn't. The scratches heal too. Not a good enough reason to let it use you as a jungle gym. John shrugged. If it's with me, it's not bothering you. The fact that it's staring at me from the top of your head is very much bothering me. Okay. Chamomile? Chamomile paused in its rolling in John's hair. Down. Chamomile gave a parting tug on some locks, then crawled hastily down John's side, all the way to the floor. It stole one of John's slippers and scuttled under the bed. There. What? Chamomile? Since when is it chamomile? Since I got tired of just calling it a thing. They can't all be things, like the thing that used to be a flower box that sleeps on the porch swing now. That's Petunia. And it just listens to you, like that. Sort of. Not sure if it's me being compelling or it getting spooked by the eyes or just me being understood despite the language barrier, but it gets gone when I tell it. Does it come back? What? If you call it, does it come out? John hadn't tried before. Usually it just popped up whenever and wherever it felt like, which was usually too many places and too often for John's liking. Still. Chamomile. He tapped his slipperless foot on the floorboards. Come on. A moment later, a black blur lunged out and snapped around his ankle. It quickly circled up his leg and resumed running around on John, on the bed, on John again. I guess so. Before you say it, no, this does not count as it being tame. Do not trust this thing as far as you can throw it. It's in your lap, John. It's trying to steal the lip balm in my pocket, Martin. Chamomile is a bit of a kleptomaniac. For what? Anything it can carry. Could it? Martin threw his best glare at Chamomile, which, despite not having the facial ability for it, seemed to grin. Did it take my favourite pen? The one with the sunbeam gilding? John looked into it and promptly knew. Yes, it did. Also your pair of socks with the stars on them. I thought those got lost in one of the spiral cracks. Martin pointed an accusing finger at Chamomile, who had successfully pried the lip balm out and was now hissing with evil glee. You thieving little prick! Chamomile took this as a cue to leap and make a dash out the door. John, where does it take it all? Do you know? I've tried to see, but I think it must either be destroying them or hiding them in an unknowing pocket. Those spots where the... Martin searched for a word that would soften the description of random total disorientation and dread floated in and out of the house. Where the dizzy spells happen. Yeah. Right now it's ducking into a blind spot somewhere in the dining room, behind the china cabinet. They went to it. Martin got dizzy and had to retreat, but John weathered it easily enough, prying back the cabinet. Chamomile crouched atop its hoard, sulking at the discovery. There's our little buddy. It snapped and chittered menacingly. John pried one eye open, and the chittering became less menacing. John gathered up Martin's stolen goods, but left the lip balm. That was a mistake, if only because it resulted in a new equation for Chamomile. Martin's stuff equals no. John's stuff equals not no. This led to Chamomile making a point of claiming anything John appeared to have even passing ownership of, which didn't bother John. He barely used anything in the house anymore, and he was actually rather pleased at the routine when the tape recorders started popping up again. A tape recorder on the kitchen table, in the living room, on the bed, by his chair. John only had to touch it, wait, and conspicuously turn his back to it. A moment later, there would be a stealthy skittering and a scrape of plastic. When he looked back, there would be no tape recorder. Or a very definitely real tape recorder, holding its shape, hiding its many eyes inside the spools of the cassette. John would oblige the latter by reaching over to click a button, only to be dutifully shocked and outraged when Chamomile revealed itself in a flailing of limbs and teeth. Rinse. Repeat. Just another thing to adapt around. And then about a month in, Petunia crossed paths with it. John didn't know how or why Chamomile had gone out, or why it had gotten Petunia upset. If he had to guess, he'd say Chamomile had made its own mistake of perception and mistaken Petunia for an actual arrangement of flowers. Perhaps it had intended to rip some up and camouflage itself there to spook Martin, should he come around to pick some non-hazardous blooms to put in the pitcher on the kitchen table. John could imagine it going to tear out a few flowers, only to discover that Petunia didn't like having its toxic hackles yanked on. Thank you. John might have known what would happen, only he was still quite preoccupied with his psyche that was being perpetually drowned in the mire of human terror and misery going on beyond the house's acreage. It kept one rather distracted, but not quite distracted enough to keep from hearing the racket coming from the front porch. One noise was a colossal rolling warble of bass, like a bull crocodile crossed with the glottal noise of a backed-up train. The other noise was the tinny, shrilling sound of an insectile creature that was fighting for its life, and knowing it was losing. John was out the door before Martin could ask him what the hell was happening. On the porch swing, Petunia's flowers were snarled around Chamomile's thrashing shape, slowly dragging it towards the soft, acidic chasm that served as its mouth. Martin had mentioned catching it in their outdoor trash bin more than once, dissolving and slurping up whatever was inside. At least they wouldn't have to worry about garbage. Chamomile was no longer shrilling, but squealing. Its claws dragged desperately at the air while the nested mouth clung as hard as it could to Petunia's surface, steadily losing its hold. Hey. Chamomile looked up with all its eyes. The limbs flailed in his direction, the squeal rising up to a high dog whistle keening. Petunia did not pause. John opened half his eyes. Hey. Chamomile and Petunia flinched in unison. The attempted meal came to a wincing halt. Petunia had no eyes of its own, but the petals all turned to look at him. John walked up to the swing, eyes burning, his voice now his voice. Both Chamomile and Petunia flattened themselves as much as they could. John untangled Chamomile without looking and scooped it up in one hand. The other pointed at Petunia. No. No fighting. He turned his eyes on Chamomile. No fighting. He looked to both of them, splitting his eyes in either direction. Understand. They couldn't answer, but Petunia did slide off the swing and squelch its way off to the porch to pout in the crawl space. And Chamomile didn't act up for the rest of the, quote, day, unquote. Instead, it welded itself to John's side, refusing to stay away no matter how many times John shooed it. When he turned in for bed and another fun bout of pretending he could sleep for more than an hour, Chamomile was still there. So, Martin hummed as Chamomile made its new bed in John's hair, should we find a bell to hang on him? It's not a cat, of course. Do you think Cammy would feel at home in one of the teapots? There's a chipped one in the pantry. We could stick a little pillow inside. Martin. Since when is it Cammy? Martin hummed again and pretended to reread the same article from the same outdated Homes and Garden magazine. Oh, I'd say you decided to rescue the little terror from its imminent demise and let it crawl into bed with you. He turned a page and pretended to reread that too. Should we lay a dish out for them? Do they actually eat anything? Not that I know of. And it John tamped down a sigh as Chamomile made another fidgeting circuit across his face and back up to his scalp. They could just as easily be on your side of the bed. No, that's all you. It's gone and imprinted on you now. Not a duckling, either. John waited as Chamomile climbed down again, this time deciding to get cozy, right on top of his Adam's apple. The oblong limbs hugged him like a necklace. You aren't comfortable having them here, are you? I'm not thrilled. Exactly. But this is how our version of normal is going to work, so I've got to get acclimatized, don't I? This isn't normal. And no, you don't. I don't even know if they're safe to have around when we sleep. I just put them in the hall, put a towel against the door, or you could capital T talk to them. And say what? No maiming us in our sleep, Chamomile. That's a no-no. Well, it's certainly something to work into the message, yeah. But I was thinking more along the lines of, positive reinforcement. All the big talks you've given out have been, no, don't do that finger wagging. Alright, first off, I do not finger wag. Second of all, that term is terrible. Don't use it again. See, finger wagging. I'm not! John could almost see the halo Martin was trying to will into existence over his head. He looked down to where Chamomile had changed their mind again, making a new bed out of his nearly concave stomach. There was more room than usual with the missing ribs. John opened an eye. Chamomile. Chamomile froze. Watched. John drummed his fingers on his chest. Come here. Chamomile crept up to his sternum. John waited until they were still before laying his hand on them. There was only space in the exact middle of their back to actually pet, but this was apparently enough to make Chamomile untense, to the point of being basically liquid. The moment John paused, the tension snapped back, and the nested mouth hissed. No. Quiet. Back to rubbing. Yes. Chamomile resumed melting into a multi-legged tangle of unholy, contented sounds. For one deeply sour moment, John thought of Dylan Anderson and his monstrous pig. The latter had been an intrinsically malevolent beast, which decided out of all the living things it considered meals, Dylan was the one who qualified as its friend. Only Dylan had let Gertrude smother the thing in concrete. John had, for reasons he had no energy to scrutinize, rescued the menace, making its hideous pleased sounds over his heart. That's right, John sighed. Friend. When John's hand got tired and tried to pull away, Chamomile immediately snapped their limbs around his fingers, caging them. Martin, that's your cue. Oh, what? Right, yeah. Second thoughts. No, it's just, well, you can heal up if they get snippy. I've only got the one set of fingers. I'll keep my eye on them. Chamomile looked up at him, still clinging to his hand. Martin, John said, pointing to Martin. Yes. Friend. Chamomile regarded Martin blandly. When Martin reached for them with his left hand, John saw, the spindly limbs rose up in rigid spikes. Friend, John repeated. He pointed to himself. John, friend. Back to Martin. Martin, friend. Yes. The limbs gradually untensed. Martin followed suit. A bit. He touched the center of Chamomile's back with his middle finger. Whether Chamomile was following the term friend or not, they absolutely recognized what the contact meant. Martin let out a very interesting noise as Chamomile immediately jumped from John's chest to his, promptly settling on his collarbone. Their limbs bent backwards on joints that made no sense, tapping their back impatiently. Martin got to work. The horrible, happy noises resumed. Oh, okay, that's, I did not expect it to feel like massaging a wet leather sack full of beads and pus. You really have a way with words, John. And yeah, thank you. That is exactly what it feels like. Well, you two enjoy each other. Good night. John turned off his lamp and closed his eyes, keeping one eye half open. John. John pulled the covers up to his chin. John. John turned over. Jonathan Sims, you are not leaving me like this. I can't even turn the pages now. They've got me using both hands. John. John snored. Cammy, get him. Go to John. John friend. Please? John smiled for the first time in a week against the pillow. He waited until Martin was truly on the tipping point of REM sleep before quietly turning back over. Chamomile was folded up under both of Martin's broad hands, looking like a dark lump of pins and toothpicks. The moment John moved, the protrusion that seemed to be their head perked up, half their eyes shining open. Go back to sleep. It's fine. But he was not using his voice, and he did not bother to shoo them when he was followed out to the front porch. Petunia had still not returned to the swing. John swept the leftover granules of dirt off and sat. There was no ignoring the horror tides now, not with Martin asleep. Even so, he preferred to be outdoors, as if he could hide his contentment at consumption the same way he had once snuck his cigarettes. Chamomile perched on his knee, above them as always. The eye stared. The next tape recorder appeared a week later, along with their guest. John's only excuse for missing its arrival was that a particularly big pocket of unknowing had passed through at the exact same time. A great lumbering cloud of it, actually, straining reality with free-floating impossibilities and general strangeness before drifting off to the west. There had been a knock at the door, just as it passed over the house. Martin had answered it. Later, he would tell John that he vaguely remembered thinking he was back in his flat, welcoming a new neighbour inside. He had already been pouring tea by the time he began to register that something was wrong. Namely, that their guest was not only not human, but not letting his mind go. It had him just tight enough in its mental grasp that Martin was forced to perform the polite gestures of a welcoming host, but just loose enough to know that he was talking to a creature that could, would, and wanted to eat his life once it grew bored of him walking around. John walked in on the pair of them, sitting on the couch, their cups still on the table, as Martin grinned helplessly at the guest's tight-lipped smile. Sweat was beaded on his brow, and the first sheen of tears was misting his eyes. The guest glanced John's way with lukewarm interest. Vampires, John saw now, were only capable of psychic communication as a one-way street, shouting their mental chatter and flinging their telepathic hooks out without being able to receive anything back. If the vampire had been capable of hearing what John was thinking, he was quite sure it would fling itself out the window. Instead, it let John take an armchair and sit with his own teacup in one hand. The vampire did not seem to notice or care how John had brought his own cup into the room when the full tea service was laid out on the table, no more than it seemed to care that Martin had poured fresh cups of centipedes rather than tea. These things happened. It did seem slightly on edge about the fact that John refused to respond to its mute conversation starters. Hello. Am new neighbour. Am greeting. Lovely home. John only stared and cradled his cup. He waited until it turned to face Martin before gently suggesting, You can leave now and serve as a warning to your fellow leeches, or you can stay for tea. John raised the cup to the level of his chin. Which is it? The vampire frowned at him, clearly not being used to being noticed in the world pre-change, used to being extremely unnoticeable in the world post-change. There were so many louder, plainer horrors skulking around that they could glide about virtually invisible. John was spoiling the script, but not by enough. It grinned at him. Tea. Very thirsty. At that, the grin began peeling open. The teeth were just as Trevor Herbert had described, more shark than leech, the tongue a slithering proboscis. Martin gawked between this sight and John and back again, still frozen in place. The tongue flew. I do hope you like chamomile. The cup was, of course, no longer a cup. The reality of it lunged and clamped around the tip like a jagged fist. Chamomile hissed in elation as the vampire's eyes bulged. There were a few panicked grabs at them, the pale hands clawing wildly at the black clump of pincers and claws. Martin broke free of the spell just as the proboscis' tip fell and plopped meatily on the coffee table. Jesus Christ! He began and didn't finish as John got him to his feet and out of the room. John stayed with him, seeing the rest, regardless. One moment, chamomile was trimming off chunks of tongue. The next, they were disappearing down the vampire's throat. This would have been considered impossible, given how the vampire's anatomy allowed no passage for anything but the tongue, but chamomile quickly made the necessary adjustments. Snip, clip, claw, cut, all the way down. Even without vocal cords, the wet, bubbling sounds the vampire produced before it hit the floor were quite the giveaway as to just how comfortable the procedure wasn't. The rest of the noise came down to very muffled, likewise fleshy sounds coming from inside the vampire's chest cavity. Minutes later, chamomile came scuttling into the kitchen, every spare appendage cradling a new prize. They laid over a dozen serrated teeth on the floor at John and Martin's feet. Martin looked from these to the limp legs that were visible from around the corner of the room. John got to one knee and scooped chamomile up, thumbing away some red grime. You've earned those. They're yours. Good chamomile. Martin? Martin had dared to peek into the living room. He had then promptly gone to the kitchen sink, where he was deciding whether or not he was going to dry heave. Yeah? Are you all right? Will be, I think. John waited, rubbing circles in chamomile's back. Then, Petunia prefers to eat out of the bin, right? Yeah. Do you want to get the arms or the legs? Martin hocked something into the sink. Martin? Arms! I'll get the arms. He straightened and looked to chamomile. After several wobbling breaths, he made it to John's side. Chamomile trilled their terrible joy song as Martin pet them alongside John's kneading thumb. Good work, Cammy. He mustered something close to a smile. And to think I used to not like teacup breeds. John bit down a retch. Martin, I love you very much, but that one may actually get me to throw myself in the bin too. I'm going to knit a little shirt for them. It'll say you're my cup of tea. I will pull you into the bin with me. Chamomile lingered on John's shoulder as he and Martin took out the trash. Martin knocked on the metal so it rang, now a habit whenever he dumped something new in the bin. Petunia came lurching into view, all eager gurgles and pulsing flowers. Thank you. They spared a growl at Chamomile, who spared a hiss back, before both parties resumed their mutual ignorance of each other. Then Petunia got in the bin and was left to their work. That night, at least the darkest portion of the day, ergo night, Dinner barely put up a fight before giving in and deciding to just stay pasta. Martin ate more than he had in days. John ate a few forkfuls that he came close to actually tasting through the usual miasma of the constant human misery meal, and Chamomile ran around, cheerfully slaying every centipede that was missed in the post-vampire cleanup. John thought of a book to know, a comedy, and read the text aloud as if he held the novel in front of him, complete with voices, making Martin crack up in glassy-eyed snorts and wheezes for hours. Chamomile kept at least 3 hands on them at all times, as was their due. Outside, the changed world rolled around their little house, in the eye of the storm. But inside, well, at least they had tea.
I had way too much fun.
You had lots of fun with that.
Yes, I did. You only cracked once. I'm very impressed. Thank you for our performance arts.
I could hear Alex responding to, "Do you want the arms or the legs?" Oh God, oh. No better line delivery across the entire show than "Oi, dickhead." Thank you, folks.
That was really sweet. I liked that a lot. The plushies were just extra.
That was nice. I like that.
There we go.
That's our show.
Yeah?
Yeah. Massive thanks to Scribbled. Hold on, I have my notes to hand.
You can do it. Serotonin criminals. I like that description.
Smooth serotonin criminals. Massive thanks to Axolotl Sketches for footage of Elias and Peter's sick divorce, our opening fan art. Massive thanks too to the amazing Jen for coming on and talking about her fantastic books. Please track them down wherever you are. This is what libraries are for, or bookshops are for. Jen is genuinely one of the best in the field. You want to talk about authors that give me hope for the future of genre fiction. We spent an hour and a half talking to one tonight. Immense thanks too to Dribble Scribbles for the lovely fanfiction story, Chamomile, or as we chose very specifically to not call it, Chamomile. Chamomile. And thanks to you for listening, and to our amazing mods, because you're amazing, and Marguerite for also being amazing. And you know what? I was pretty great too. You cannot catch us this Sunday because we will not be streaming, because we will be by the beach.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. We're going to Bournemouth for a long weekend for Marguerite's birthday. And can't believe you got this close to it without you mentioning it.
Oh, I was going to say it.
If any of you want to do the gift thing, let me know. I'll hook you up. Yeah, we'll be coming back on Monday, so we'll be streaming as normal on Wednesday night.
Right.
When
it's in the notes. Yes. So July is a month of guests. We are doing our summer interview series.
Yes.
Coming up next week.
Next week we have Matty O.K. Smith of Neighbourly, which I'm
Yep, that's right.
incredibly excited about.
And then we have a couple of other guests that we are nailing down and we'll announce next week.
Yes.
We just have to confirm times with everybody.
So that's going to be a lot of fun. Also, this...
Yeah, I'm sorry in advance for your TBR piles, everybody. Just, y'all are going to buy books. That's the way it works.
Neighbourly!
Yes.
And we will be back a week on Sunday with more space camping. And then, like I say, we'll be back this coming Wednesday with talking to the amazing Matty. Thank you very much for joining us.
We will not be nailing down Matty.
There will be no nailing down of Matty. Don't worry, it's fine. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you in a week.
Sounds good, everybody. Good night.
Good night.